Hey everyone, it's Sevy. The next main event of Fontaine's show comes as Lynette, our adorable and introverted magician's assistant. Aside from accompanying her brother on his limited banner, Lynette can be obtained by travelers for free, so some of you are probably raring to slot her into your teams. In this video, we'll discuss all about Lynette's kit and talents, constellations, best artifacts and weapons, different playstyles, and team synergies to help you maximize what she can offer. Let's get on with the show!
Pleased to make your acquaintance. I am Linny's magic assistant.
Lynette is a 4-star Anemo Sword user and Usia-aligned unit. She's generally played as an off-field support that provides Anemo and Elemental-infused damage and application, and equipment that boosts her team utility. Some may also be interested in using her as an on-field DPS, particularly when you unlock her final constellation. Let's go through her kit and talents first. Lynette's normal attacks consist of a 4-hit combo with a 20-cost charged attack. The multipliers are on the relatively lower side, but if you're mainly using her as an off-field support, this won't matter much. If ever you decide to use her as an on-field carry, her normal attacks will compose a significant part of her damage. However, I should probably make it clear here already that you shouldn't expect a Lynette DPS playstyle, even with C6 unlocked, to be anywhere near competitive against actual dedicated DPSs. But if that won't stop you and you understand her limitations, then why not? So don't worry, I'll cover some tips as well on making her your team carry as we go along. Moving on, Lynette's skill has a press and hold version. Pressing it activates her Enigma Thrust, which deals 1 instance of Anemo damage to a target enemy and swirls any element on them, which also generates 4 Anemo particles. This Enigma Thrust can affect adjacent enemies if they're close enough together. On the other hand, holding it makes Lynette enter a shadow state with increased mobility. During this, she can mark one enemy to apply shadow sign on them, and when you exit this state, she lunges towards the mark with her Enigma Thrust. If you want to end it early though, don't use the dash button as that will cancel the hit. Instead, press the skill button again to immediately attack the marked enemy. Either way, hitting an enemy activates her HP draining mechanic. She first gains 25% of her max HP, then she'll continuously keep losing 6% of her current HP per second for 4 seconds. This is likely building on the HP-based mechanics that Fontaine is setting up, so it will help enable equipment that use HP draining and restoring triggers. Additionally, Lynette has her Usia ability, wherein her skill can unleash the Surging Blade every 10 seconds to deal Anemo damage and have special combat effects against Usia weak enemies. Then, casting Lynette's Burst deals AoE Anemo damage and summons the Bogglecat box. This box mainly does 3 things. First, it taunts enemies, which can help keep enemy attacks away and group them together for AoE damage. Second, it deals AoE Anemo damage every second. This follows standard ICD mechanics though, so not every hit will apply Anemo and swirl. And third, it can absorb an element it swirls to infuse itself and periodically fire shots of that element. The Bogglecat box also doesn't snapshot, which isn't necessarily bad as this allows for rotations and synergies where Lynette can take advantage of dynamic buffs. The burst does cost 70, which is on the higher side, and as a support unit, you do want to burst every rotation for its utilities, on top of being her main source of off-field damage. This leads to her having a fairly high ER target in most teams, but more on that in the build section. Now for Lynette's passive talents. Her Ascension 1 passive increases your entire team's attack after using her burst. The attack increase is based on how many different elements there are on the team, starting at 8% for 1 element and 20% for 4 elements. This is a nice support bonus for boosting team damage regardless of whatever team she's in. Just let it happen naturally and don't sacrifice good team synergy to force a higher attack buff. Then her Ascension 4 passive increases her burst damage after the Bogglecat box infuses an element, which is a simple damage bump. And lastly, her Exploration passive marks recovery orbs in your minimap, which is mainly to help ease your underwater exploration. For her talent priority, if you're using her mainly as a support and is at C0 to C5, prioritize her burst and skill, with her normal attacks being at very low priority. However, if you're actually aiming to use her as an on-field DPS, particularly at C6, then you can start investing in her normal attacks more. At C0, Lynette's kit is functional enough, but with Constellations, she gets very good utilities and even a playstyle changing mechanic. Let's go through them. C1 lets her skill now create a vortex after hitting a shadow sign marked enemy. The suction power isn't anywhere close to Kazuha and Venti levels and is closer to Heizo's burst. Still, it's added crowd control utility that you'd naturally expect from an Anemo unit with some use against light enough enemy mobs. C2 makes her burst now fire off 2 vivid shots, which means extra damage and, more important, importantly, a chance to deal damage and apply an element to more enemies at a time. C3 increases her burst level by 3. C4 gives her skill an extra charge. The charges share a cooldown though, so it depends on your rotation how much value you get from this, whether you're using her in a quick swap team or if she's off-field for a long time. This can let you front-load a bit more damage and particle generation by doing 2 consecutive skills and suction enemies twice in a row for added crowd control. C5 increases her skill level by 3. And finally, C6 lets her infuse her normal attacks with Anemo for 6 seconds with a 20% Anemo damage buff after using her skill. It's a pretty interesting constellation since this can enable an on-field Anemo driver role or even an Anemo carry playstyle if you're up for that. The Anemo infusion lasts for 6 seconds, so you'd have to refresh it by using her skill to keep her Anemo infusion longer on-field, and thankfully, her C4 gives her 2 charges by default. Again, she won't exactly be a competitive DPS, but it's another way of playing her for those who are really interested. Now onto her artifact stats and set recommendations. For her standard build, her sands can either be attack or ER, depending if she still needs a lot of ER, with an Anemo damage goblet and crit circlet. With substats, prioritize getting enough ER, followed by crit and attack. EM is also welcome for more swirl damage. Another option is to build her full EM for swirl and reaction focused damage, but if you're in the process of building other Anemo units like Sucrose and Kazuha, they'll want those pieces more since they'll make better use of the EM. The attack crit build is generally a safe choice in many combat scenarios, though an EM build can get more value if in situations where you can do lots of AoE swirl damage and reactions, and in specific reaction teams. On the topic of her ER needs, it can vary depending on her weapon, team, and combat scenario. For a ballpark figure, here are some sample scenarios. Note that these assume minimal Favonius procs, so there's still room to lower Lynette's ER needs if your team rotation can proc Fav particles more often. Enemy particles can also affect this. If you are using a sack sword, you'd really want R4 or R5 to consistently trigger the skill refresh per rotation. Now, if you're using Lynette as a C6 hypercarry, you can instead focus on offensive stats, so you don't have to worry about her ER needs, and she can just burst every other rotation, which is generally just better and less strict to build. A hypercarry Lynette team also assumes you have other battery teammates like Farazan to feed her particles. As for her sets, her general best in slot support build is the 4-piece Viridescent Venerer, no surprise there. Its Anemo damage, swirl bonus, and elemental resistance shred are all incredibly useful for her kit and boosting her other teammates' overall damage. However, in teams where you have another Anemo unit that could hold the 4-piece VV instead, Lynette can swap over to a 4-piece Noblesse Oblige to instead give a team-wide attack buff. Other sets focused on her personal damage would be 4-piece Emblem for the ER and burst damage bonuses, or Golden Troop to further boost her skill damage, although you would want to use her skill twice per rotation to take full advantage. However, in most cases, just using the VV or Noblesse to boost your entire team's damage is just better. Now, if you do have C6 and want to try using her as an on-field Anemo hypercarry, you can slap on sets that give Anemo damage bonus, attack, or normal attack bonuses to boost her on-field damage. The Desert Pavilion, Shimenawa, Gladiator's Finale will all be viable good options, but her potentially top DPS set would be the 4-piece Marechaussee Hunter, and she can easily stack the crit rate bonuses with her skill's HP gain and drain mechanic. Moving on to her weapon choices, it'll be divided between energy recharge or more offensive attack crit weapons. For starters, this is an opportunity to address a large chunk of her ER needs by using an ER sword. The Favonius Sword or an R4 to R5 sacrificial sword are general top picks to address a lot of her energy concerns, with Favonius having more team-wide battery utility and Sac Sword having lower personal ER requirements and a skill refreshing effect. Aside from that, the Skyward Blade or Festering Desire are good alternative options, and there's also a new Fontaine fishing reward ER sword, the Fleuve Cendre Ferryman, which has an ER substat and a passive that gives a skill crit rate and ER bonus, but gives a ton of negative riz. On the other hand, if you really want to see bigger numbers on her, you can equip a more offensive weapon with a crit or attack substat and damage-related buffs. Be aware that this will impact her ER requirements a lot. If she's on a support build, bursting reliably is very important. So unless you can meet her energy needs without an ER weapon, I'd recommend sticking to an ER sword instead. But if you're trying to use her as a hypercarry unit, particularly if you have her C6 unlocked, then definitely prioritize a crit sword for maximum damage. Her ER needs can be filled in by other support batteries instead, and she can simply burst every other rotation as discussed previously. Finally, let's go through her team synergies and considerations. At a basic level, she can act as an Anemo support for most teams that would highly benefit from a VV user shredding the enemy's resistance and/or swirling and applying elements. Think most teams where Sucrose and Kazuha work, and Lynette would very likely function there too. Perhaps not at the same level, but still passable as a VV-equipped Anemo unit. Templates like Vaporize, Melt, Freeze, Electrocharge, Aggravate, and Mono-element teams, and so on, benefit a lot from a VV user after all. And I always note in my character guides where Anemo Flex units are welcome, so Lynette will more or less be a viable option in those templates. You might have the technically better alternatives, so you're probably comping Lynette for personal preference, which is perfectly fine. If you have her C6 unlocked, she can be an Anemo driver who activates off-field attacks like Xingqiu or Yelan's Burst, similar to how Sucrose is often played as an on-field driver. If you're a mono Anemo fan, she can assume a slot in a Wanderer or Shao plus Farazan Bennett core team. She would be doing a decent amount of damage in that team and can help mitigate some of Farazan's ER demand, at the expense of not having a shielder. Perhaps her most glaring considerations are that her suction is pretty mild, assuming you even have her C1 unlocked, and that she doesn't have more valuable support buffs like damage bonus or EM sharing. Her team-wide attack buff is fine of course, but damage bonuses and EM are generally more potent. But as an Usia-aligned unit, she can have situational combat advantages against certain Fontaine-based enemies, which is when she may be preferred over other Anemo supports. And if we get more units that synergize with other units that can drain their own HP, then she may eventually have more team possibilities. Now, if you're considering making her team star DPS, then you're looking at a hypercarry team with her C6 unlocked. However, in order to maximize this team's potential, she really wants a Farazan, most preferably C6 as well, who will mainly give big Anemo-related buffs. Bennett would be a highly recommended third unit to buff and heal your team. Then the fourth flex slot is up to you depending if you want more offense, defense, or buffing utilities. Unfortunately, if you have Bennett C6 unlocked, his Pyro Infusion will override Lynette's Anemo. In that case, you should use another support. I do wish they included the condition that her infusion cannot be overridden. Lynette could also act as a decent Hyperbloom driver, alternating for Sucrose in the Sucrose Xingqiu Official and Denjo Hyperbloom team, also known as Salad. Here, Lynette is swirling Electro around, which causes the Denjo course to trigger. That means the Hyperbloom damage will scale from Lynette's stats, so you want her at a high level with a full EM build instead. And that's it for Lynette. Let me know if you're already building her and what you think so far, or if you don't plan to for now. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!
Go to sleep. I still have some loose ends to tie up from work today.